Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's call for help from the ADX Florence prison introduces us to a legendary character whose name is marked by wealth and bathed in blood. Leader of the Sinaloa cartel and master of escape, he defied the laws and kept two continents in suspense with his cunning and illusion. However, in a movie-worthy twist, his reign of terror came to a dramatic and surprising end. Today, El Chapo Guzman is in a state of relentless isolation in one of the most secure and restricted prisons, ADX Florence. But before continuing with the video, we ask for your help to reach 100,000 subscribers. So we ask you to subscribe to make this community of those passionate about drug stories bigger. Imagine such a drastic change in the story of a man who used to live away from the sunlight and defying the rules. Now he finds himself exposed to the despair of the absence of human interactions, cloistered in this abyss of rigidity. Join us on a journey to discover the conditions that led the most wanted drug trafficker to ask for help and the truths behind this conflictive scenario. On this journey into the underworld of crime and punishment, where the cunning of escapists has no place and the hope of freedom is a distant dream, it is essential to understand El Chapo's position in order to understand the conditions he faces daily after the ADX Florence bars. It's crucial to get to know the meticulous fortress in the middle of the mountains, where heavily armed units patrol and dozens of watchtowers rise above brick buildings, with walls topped with barbed wire partially blocking the view of the snow-capped mountains. This extreme isolation is meticulously designed to house inmates considered extremely dangerous, including some of the country's most notorious criminals. The measures taken at ADX Florence may seem extreme and scandalous to some, while pleasing to others. For example, extreme isolation means that inmates are virtually isolated from other prisoners, spending most of their time in individual cells measuring approximately 7 by 2 feet. This complete separation is implemented to avoid any type of contact between prisoners and thus reduce the risk of violence between them. However, this extreme isolation can also have serious consequences, such as cognitive deterioration and the decrease in social skills necessary for healthy coexistence. Imagine someone as controversial and well-known in the world of organized crime as Chapo Guzman facing these conditions. Inmates at ADX Florence face extremely severe restrictions on their communication with the outside world. Both your telephone communications and those sent by mail are subject to rigorous control and constant monitoring. Additionally, they have extremely limited access to visitors and, in many cases, are allowed to interact only with a small number of pre-approved people. All of this occurs under strict supervision and surveillance, as inmates are constantly observed by both security personnel and surveillance cameras. The guards are specially trained to act immediately upon any sign of threat or inappropriate behavior. Inmates' movements are heavily restricted, and most of their daily activities take place within their own cells, forcing them to face the walls that separate them from the outside world. The prison is highly equipped with access control systems and contingency measures designed to prevent possible escape attempts or riots. It is crucial to note that during the first years of an inmate's stay at ADX Florence, extreme restrictions regarding human contact are placed on them. These restrictions are so severe that any individual would be forced to question comfort, a concept practically non-existent in this environment. Each cell provides the essentials such as toilets, a couple of pieces of furniture, and a few other objects that do not pose any risk as they are designed with safety in mind. The daily routine of the inmates depends on each individual, and in the case of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, whose nature was not exactly peaceful, his calls for attention have been particularly notable, but at the same time they are limited to the media. available. El Chapo claims to have suffered considerably within the walls of ADX Florence, raising significant questions regarding the will of governments and the rights of those imprisoned. This evidences a dispute over the humane treatment of those who have been marginalized in society due to their crimes. The opening of this debate about El Chapo Guzman's conditions at ADX Florence sheds light on crucial conflicts related to the treatment and rights of prisoners within the penal system. It is maintained that Guzman has been exposed to conditions considered inhumane, which represents a sudden change in the life of someone accustomed to luxury and the good life. The claims cover aspects as serious as torture and attacks against all aspects of their health. In this case, the notion of justice is in a delicate balance, and El Chapo will do everything possible to take advantage of it. Strict rules, along with rigid schedules, coupled with tight, confined space conditions, are just the beginning of their difficulties. Guzman's lawyers have noted that he speaks Spanish, which adds another element to the complexity of his situation. While the staff in charge of his custody communicate exclusively in English, adding another small torment to his tolerance threshold, El Chapo claims that he is flatly denied access to programs in his native language and other forms of entertainment. His recreation time becomes a time when his only respite from the walls of his cell is to look at the sky. But even in this short space of time, he is limited by a space not much larger than his own cell. The situation is such that inmates have adopted the habit of shouting through the ventilation shafts to be heard by their distant neighbors, highlighting the desperation they feel for normal human interactions. They are not even allowed to share a common dining room. Each of them eats individually in their cells, and this pattern is reflected in all their daily activities. Over time, inmates may acquire certain privileges and opportunities to socialize, but these concessions are limited. However, these are considered as valuable as gold and are only granted in the last year of their stay with the intention of encouraging more sociable behavior appropriate for their eventual release. Considering El Chapo's prospects, it's easy to conclude that escaping ADX Florence seems virtually impossible. So who else but a drug trafficking legend could pull it off? When analyzing the situation, it is more than evident that he prefers to be in the custody of Mexican prisons and request help as a last resort. The Mexican prison environment is perceived as more lenient, or rather more humane, which would facilitate any move you want to make. It is not difficult to deduce why he made such a call to attention to the Mexican authorities, since by comparison, the regime at ADX Florence is extraordinarily desperate. In fact, the former director of the penitentiary went so far as to describe it as something worse than death. Communication with the outside world becomes a distant dream for the inmates of ADX Florence. Telephone calls and letters are subject to constant surveillance, and visitors are rare and highly controlled. The inmates are practically buried alive, condemned to extreme loneliness. In addition to El Chapo, there are approximately 400 prisoners in this dark hell full of silent screams. Although they are not equally famous, their names have been heard and repudiated considerably, as in the case of Theodore Kinski. All residents at ADX Florence share a common characteristic. They force the world to ensure maximum security and isolation, which calls into question Guzman's statement about their conditions. Each of the minds that inhabit this place is prone to isolation and conspiracy, which justifies the extreme measures taken in its custody. Every movement within the facilities is carefully monitored, and inmates must wear restraints on their torso, hands, and feet, always in sight and under the constant supervision of guards and prison entities. Guzman's message reached the ears of Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who expressed his willingness to collaborate with Chapo's request. However, Guzman's criminal history and notoriety make it unlikely that other competent entities will join the proposal. Chapo's past and the weight of his actions have virtually sealed his chances of being heard regarding his grievances, contributing to the dehumanization and lack of empathy toward his case in general. His mere presence in ADX Florence is a constant reminder of the crimes he has committed. El Chapo alleges that he is denied basic requests and conditions, which violates his human rights, highlighting an issue that has remained hidden under the table for many years. This manifests the complexity of cooperation between countries in the detention of high-profile prisoners. The situation is a constant reminder that the treatment of prisoners must be humane and fair, and that fundamental rights must always be respected. Addressing and delving into issues so deeply rooted in situations like this is essential to promote a more equitable and just prison system. It is an important step towards coexistence and a sense of community behind bars. It also represents a challenge to the influences of renowned figures in an attempt to differentiate being from desert. The transition from moral conflict to economic conflict reveals the powerful influence of power and wealth in our lives. When people in high positions gain power, they sometimes sacrifice their initial moral or ideological principles in pursuit of financial gain or political influence. Ethics and responsibility often give way to the thirst for power and money. This shift in focus from a moral conflict to an economic one is especially evident when a high-status person is involved. This process serves as a reminder that life is full of difficult decisions and ethical compromises, challenging you to reflect on the true nature of power, morality, and identity. In a constantly evolving world, ethics and responsibility are valid principles when there is no profit involved. Validation of high positions and corruption represent a significant obstacle to achieving true justice. And that's all for today. I hope you liked the video. If so, give it a like. Subscribe if you are truly passionate about drug stories. See you next time.